Right. Is everyone able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Please let me know if anybody cannot see it. Oh, got a chat. This is all very fascinating. I've never done a poster presentation online before, so we're all learning. So just to give you a little bit of background on what we looked at, we were both very interested in what the literature situation is out there regarding counseling and the Asian diaspora specifically. So diaspora refers to anybody coming from those Asian countries, which would include, of course, immigrants, but would also include international students, would include people here on temporary visas, etc. So we wanted to see what was out there regarding the actual scholarship on the Asian diaspora. To do this, we did a content analysis. We used psych databases, so psych articles and psych info, to plug in keywords related to mental health and the diaspora, and found out what is out there. We did limit our search to 2010 to 2019 so that we had more of the recent literature and could understand where the state is at this time. And then we found the themes and kind of where we are in the literature. I don't know if Chi, do you want to take it from here and talk a little bit about what we found?
Yeah, of course. Could you zoom a little bit?
Yes.
It's I think it's on the right of the bottom. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yep.
So like, first of all, because it was because as an international myself, like I had the research in studying in Asian populations mental health counseling and their like psychological well-being, and Dr. Das provided me with a very good perspective because she's from a different ethnicity in Asian, also in from Asian continents, and that provide a very good like insight for us to delve a little bit deeper into studying how like ethnicities are very can be very different across like the Asian communities, because when a lot of people talk about Asian population, it was like just one picture of a person from Asian background, but there are a lot of ethnicities and countries and origins in the Asian continents. So we would like to study a little bit more of that. And so to start, we like Dr. Das said, we first went through we did the literature research, and we went into mainly the two search engines, the database, which was recommended by our GWU library resource. So it was mainly psych info and psych articles, and we used different like search terms that include acculturation, Asian diaspora, Asian American, mental health counseling, and international students, and so on. And we tried different combination of them to put into the search engines, and we in the end had like 44 articles in the primary results, and we refined them into 34 articles that only include Asian diaspora. So we kind of exclude the research studies that were more on other ethnicities that are not from the Asian countries. And so in the end, the population or the sample participants in all these 34 research studies are Asian population that are currently living in, or that are either currently in their country of origin or in the Western culturalized countries. So they don't have to be in the United States. They can also be like in the European countries where the culture is still like more Western culture. And also like all the articles are related to mental health counseling or psychology. For the analysis process, we conducted the descriptive analysis, and we were mainly looking at the methodologies used in these 34 research studies, the ethnicities and the population presented in these research studies, and also the journal affiliation, which we thought was very important because it could tell us how different affiliation are showing their how it can be reflected in different like association and organizations to study these population. And also in the end we came up with the topics and things that we thought were emphasized in all of the research studies. And so our results and findings. So first of all, the journal and field trends, it was pretty straightforward. We basically found that 13 articles are from American Psychological Association. So still APA present a lot of, well, in regards to this topic, APA presents more research studies. And then only 2 of them are affiliated with the American Counseling Association. From that, we feel like maybe there could be more research studies that can be studied and presented by ACA. And other studies are from suicidology or author psychology and other organizations or associations. And for the methodologies, we also looked at all the research study, and basically we analyzed them in terms of quantitative studies, qualitative studies, mixed methods, and we also singled out the studies that did the comparative, like the comparison between ethnicities. So there are studies that can be both comparative and either qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods. Well, quantitative studies meaning that they basically used questionnaires, and qualitative meaning that they were using interviews, and mixed methods are the combination of both methodologies. And yeah, and the numbers are very straightforward and presented here. So 22 of them are studied in a quantitative ways using the questionnaires and scales, like acculturation scales, and 4 of them are conducted in the format of interviews, and 5 of them are basically using like both ways. And there are 3 articles that were reviewed. So it was a similar format from our study, which is the review of the previous literature, which is also one of the sources that we based our like how we research for the empirical literature for our study. And then we calculate the ethnicities and population trends. So not surprisingly, for the most Asian American people, or most Asian like ethnicity mentioned or studied in the research are Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Indian. they include the participants living in their country of origins or those who are currently in the Western countries. And also, we presented international students as a separate group because there are a lot of international students now in the USA and also in Europe. So we thought they could represent a great amount of people who are not on the first generation or immigrant status, but also experiencing acculturation and enculturation. And what we found is that although a few studies have mentioned ethnicities like Pakistan or Vietnamese or Mongolian, but the number of them is very small. So it could be something that we could look further. It's also mentioned in our implication. And the next one is content and theme trends, which was conducted by the both of us who, Dr. Des and I both individually go through all the literature articles and find what we think was emphasized in all 34 research studies. And we in the end found a total of 17 things, and then we grouped them into 6 groups, which is identity, psychotherapy, mental health professions, supervision, intervention, and medical model impact. And identity represents understanding of language and acculturation of the person. And psychotherapy includes a little bit more different things, such as one's likelihood to seek help, social stigma towards mental health counseling, the understanding of mental health illness, the choice of mental health professionals for them, and also supervision, intervention, and medical model impact are included in this big topic as well. Interpersonal dynamics are also one group or one topic that refer to the impact from education, and parenting and discrimination against Asian population. Psychometrics individually was listed. It includes mostly like the measurement and assessment that we use as mental health professionals. And protective factors and balance were also identified as theme topics. They can be covered in different articles. So like several topic themes can be covered in one article. They don't have to be like distributed equally or like individually in each article. And it is very interesting for us to see what train of the topic and themes are more often discussed in these research articles. And based on that, we also calculate our inter-rater reliability, which means the level of agreement or consensus in our rating of these articles. So it was, it's 61.8, right? Sorry, Dr. Des, could you go up a little? Yeah, 61.8%, which is not a bad number, I would say. But also it could be different if we were to have more members on our research teams. But I think it's a good number. And
So I can talk a little bit about the implications and what this actually means for counseling and research and where we go from here.
Okay. Yeah,
so
sure.
A couple of the things that we noticed in the articles is that multiple articles, especially the ones covering psychotherapy, mentioned that discrimination, language, and stigma are affecting psychotherapy practice. So discrimination is something that clients will bring in a lot, as well as clients will discuss issues of language barriers, and that's something that their counselors are not understanding and able to accommodate. And stigma has also prevented them from seeking services, stigma within the community regarding mental health and what that means. So the recommendations from a lot of these articles was that increased information and education about mental health and counseling could potentially lead to more cultural acceptance within the Asian diaspora. But that also means that that we would be doing that outreach and trying to help Asian diaspora understand what counseling is and advocate for the profession and how it can benefit them. One of those ways that we could do that is possibly by uniting the physical and mental health aspects of counseling. Multiple studies showed that Asian diaspora clients from the Asian diaspora were more likely to seek counseling should there also be some physiological symptoms. So one of the research projects that I do separately from this is looking at sexual violence. And it's more likely that somebody would go if they have experienced violent sexual violence, meaning that there is physical harm to their body. And that would make them see a doctor, which would in turn provide referrals to mental health. So just understanding the physical and mental health aspects and how they unite could possibly bring more people from the Asian diaspora into counseling. Further, there is a need to explore identity. Asian diaspora identity has not been something that's been heavily researched. Most minoritized populations are not heavily researched, but even further the Asian diaspora, because it is so vast and different. There's also, going into research, it's necessary for identity to be explored within research, but separated from just this blob called Asian American or Asian diaspora. There's a need to look into what are the impacts and implications and counseling experiences for those from, say, Vietnamese populations and Thai populations that's separate from the broader overarching term of Asian American. We think that research should be focused on these underrepresented ethnicities, while simultaneously just saying the ethnicities that are the majority studied, which are Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indian, still underrepresented. There still should be research on them, but if you can focus research and make it ethnicity specific, that could be more helpful in understanding what it actually means for the Asian diaspora. Another implication for research is to separate things by whom you're studying. So are you studying international students? Are you studying immigrants that have been here for a while? Also looking at generational status. First generation immigrant experiences are very different from second generation immigrant experiences. And that's also divided by ethnicity. So we're really looking at, or we're really suggesting that people take a harder look at whom and what population they're studying, and reporting that in the work that they do. And then finally, most of the studies that we looked at were quantitative, and qualitative research does bring a depth to an understanding of people's experience. So we are suggesting that to add to the literature, more qualitative work within this. And with that, we'll actually go to, because we are looking at, I know people are trying to go to different poster presentations, et cetera. Do you have any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask.
So, question like, so basically this is based just on studies of, you're studying the studies, or there is no direct interview with people who are actually studying the Asian diaspora from their actual practice?
Chi, do you want to answer that?
Oh, hi, Cecilia. Was that Cecilia? Hello?
Yes, it was Cecilia. So
Oh,
we're in
hi.
the
Could
evening
you
time.
were you asking if our study includes the interview with participants directly, or?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious. I mean, even if your study, doesn't, I guess, as you have presented, whether there are some, good resources, because part of for incoming, practitioners who are interested in exploring this area is studies like yours, but also maybe practitioners who actually have field experience to convey some of the sort of skills it takes to really to communicate, like you said, like for example, combining the somatic versus the psychological in their practice to really encourage or maintain even the people's interest when they do come to
Yeah, I agree that that's a good question and also a good point. In our study, because we are doing a the content analysis in the form of a review, so we have not interviewed or surveyed participants yet. We kind of want to take that as a next step based on our current study, and also it would be a like your perspective would be a great idea for like in our implication for our future research, to provide more implication for the mental health professionals that include practitioners or also in like supervising, yeah, and that kind of. Does that make answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And is there any information about sort of because I came in maybe about 5 minutes late. I don't know if you went over certain in terms of the demand, or like I do sense in my personal experience in talking to practitioners, there did seem to be an increase in demand in general in the for therapists who specifically speak a certain language in the Asian diaspora. I wondered if in your research whether it came up on any trend differences.
That's a good point. We did list language as a barrier here. We have not looked at language as a train yet, though.
So
Okay.
to expand on what Chi shared, language was listed in multiple studies as a common barrier, which would be reflecting kind of the language differences between the person seeking counseling and the counselor themselves. So yes, it does reflect, I think, Cecilia, what you were pointing out.
Yeah, and just as like not a question, but a thought that maybe part of the increase I was thinking is because I remember some of the earlier sort of more groundbreaking articles done, maybe decades ago on Asian American mental health, is that we tend to begin to be more open to it as we become more acculturated to the culture, the mainstream culture of individuality and psychotherapy. So perhaps as the Asian diaspora in general becoming more becoming second, third generation at this point, and also with some of the overseas Asian diaspora who are studying or just living in the U.S., who are not necessarily American citizens, with the change in Chinese economics, or a lot of Asian countries. I wonder, I just thought that that will play a role in the increased need and openness to mental health.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, and also maybe because a lot of the like literature that we have here is from the previous decade, and you get them like I believe that you have the like most up-to-date trend, and we can probably work on like look a little bit closer on that in our like next step. But yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it just sounds like there are quite a bit sort of interesting areas that we could research into, and perhaps not enough research sort of projects is in this area, because we don't have enough pipelines for every part of this profession in this population.
Yeah, that could be a problem. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Daff?
I'm unmuting myself again. No, I do think that we are restricted. I mean, we did the same thing that we suggested in our research, which is not to look at the Asian diaspora as a whole. We did. So even in this overview, we're not addressing every single population and all of the needs of the different kinds of people and experiences that are looking for counseling. And I guess this kind of leads to Gideon in our Zoom chat asked a question about what are the next steps with this research and how we're going to end up focusing ourselves. So this content analysis was really to see where the status of research is right now. As Chi pointed out, my research has been primarily with South Asian Americans, and Chi's research background was looking at more East Asian Americans. So we were trying to unite our thoughts and see where things are. And what we are realizing is that there is a need, again, for more of the qualitative variety of research to really get into a depth of experience. What we also understand is that those people trying to look at some of the ethnicities, such as Vietnamese, Mongolian, Pakistani, they're also met with the barrier of sample size and how you access people for research. So a qualitative approach where you are looking at maybe fewer individuals, but getting more of a depth of experience and understanding either their identity formation and reasons for counseling, or their experience in counseling itself, we would get more data.
Yeah, basically we want to like from what we have here now, we want to like further like polish it better based on our current limitation. So like more research study that from the current like other databases to be analyzed and incorporated in our current result. And also we were trying to see if we can have more people of different ethnicities to like participate in the studies in our like future projects.
And to address Candace's question, which is, would we be pursuing a phenomenology, ethnography, or what it might be? Right now, we are doing a phenomenological inquiry into, together we're working with South Asian survivors of sexual violence. And that's a very particular population, but I believe that when we're looking at these experiential components, a phenomenology fits. The modality makes sense in terms of what we're trying to understand. Ethnographic research, though, is great. I think that is, I'll just share, that's not a counseling, that's not prevalent in the counseling literature or the psychology literature. It's much more prevalent in sociological, anthropological literature. And I think we can take a lot from those fields and possibly collaborate. And I do think that's something that I've been considering, at least, in terms of uniting with my colleagues and other graduate students in different professions. At GW, it's the Columbian School of Arts and Sciences, but that's what we would want to unite with in terms of getting that ethnographic depth. Get somewhere with that.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful.
Candace, I love that you're using a nursing counseling integration. It's great. Yeah, I mean, cultural humility came from nursing practice. I think we have so much to learn from other fields, and counseling is wonderful, but relatively young compared to the other fields, and we definitely could benefit from collaborative research and understanding. Collaborative autoethnography is pretty neat. Yes, I'm actually starting to explore an autoethnography as well. We'll see how this turns out, but thank you, Felice. Am I pronouncing that right? Okay. Yeah, so we're here for questions, thoughts. I'll zoom out of the study, but if anybody wants me to zoom into a particular part of the poster, I can do that as well. Our contact information is right here at the bottom right of your screens. So you can email either me or Chi, and we'll be happy to send along any of the articles that we looked at, answer any other questions too.
Thank you for sharing all your hard work.
Yeah, of course, you're welcome. We're honored to be here and meet all of you.
Yes. Archie, did you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I've learned a little bit about it in the our social and cultural dimension of counseling. And it could be useful for a person to like learn about his or her identity, I guess, and maybe that part could be like helpful for mental health counselor to like assist with the process of helping that client. And do you have any other question like related to the cultural genograms?
Am I muted?
No, you're not muted, Dr. Dash.
I was trying to unmute myself and I couldn't click the button.
Okay.
I was going to add, I think there's a really cool article actually that I teach family counseling, a really cool article on the use of cultural and community genograms in working with people from every minoritized backgrounds, but especially racially and ethnically minoritized backgrounds. If you email me, Bonnie Sue, I can send that to you. You might already have it, but I'd be happy to share that. I'll also add, I think the Alexander Street Press, the Ivies have, and doctors Ivy and Zalika have posted a video of the implementation of cultural and community genograms. And I will be frank with you and say that I have only been able to see it in clips, but I anticipate that that might be a good resource too. Thank you, Bonnie. I will email you that. Thoughts on navigating language barriers mentioned.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that we do find from one of the literature is that clients, I believe it was from they studied Korean clients. They would prefer the mental health professionals to speak the same language, and I think it could be understood. So for me as an international Asian international student, like maybe just more advocacy for this mental health profession in my own country, so that more people who speak Mandarin can like be more involved and learning about this field, and then be one of the people to like promote this profession in Asian community who speak Mandarin or Chinese. And does that answer your question, or do you have more like questions related to the research?
I can also add some of the, so aside from the research, when we think about language barriers, often the way to navigate that is around using interpreters. And I did want to address something that is a theme in literature, is this fear of confidentiality being broken and what truly is confidential. So one of the things to be aware of as a clinician using interpreter is how small the community is, and whether or not that interpreter possibly has connections within, is connected to your client in a different way. And if that's the case, to delineate and talk about that up front. So I guess to speak of that in an example, if I am working with a Vietnamese American client and I do not speak Vietnamese, but they would like to have an interpreter there, I might look for an interpreting service that has a Vietnamese speaker. The area that we are in Alexandria, there are very tight-knit Asian diaspora communities, and it is possible that they go to the same church or they are involved in the same social organization, etc. And if that's the case, that should be explicitly mentioned and something that you talk about as a counselor with the interpreter, and you talk through the relationship, and not to just kind of leave that as a, I won't deal with that unless it comes up, because they might not bring it up naturally.
Yeah.
Yes. All research regarding counseling highly suggests not using family member interpreters, mostly because the family member is part of that person's system and may not interpret completely accurately. In fact, as a clinician, I've had that happen, where it's not a family member, but it was somebody that was that that thought that they could be an authority in this family just because they were authority in a larger community. That there's kind of some ethical issues there, especially having children be interpreters for their parents. That's a great ethical issue because it changes the power and the hierarchy and the dyad, that the power dyads that might exist in the relation in the family. So those involve some great ethical issues. I would always suggest having an interpreting service where they've gone through HIPAA training and also understand what their roles are and are able to literally interpret rather than give their own interpretation of what you're saying. I really appreciate all the questions. Feel free to ask more, or again, I can zoom into certain parts if you need to. Chi, would you like to address this or?
Yes, I think one thing that I can think of is to like when working with Asian community, I guess it's just to like one thing we always talk about is to be self-aware, and even before I conduct this research with Dr. Das, I kind of have like one piece of image that like Asian people are like just like East Asian people, like that include Chinese or Korean or Japanese. So it's very critical for counselors to see that South Asian, Southeast Asian are different from each other, and also from different from East Asian or Central Asian, and it's just I think it's important to maybe learn a little bit more about like the cultures of that particular ethnicity.
And if I could add to that, I'd also say that a lot of the recommendations in terms of learning more about the ethnicity, that really does, it's similar to what we talk about when in the concepts of cultural humility. So rather than thinking that you need to know everything about every ethnicity, or finding out that your client is Korean, so going and reading everything that you can, but to take the stance that you do not know, and to be curious and ask and understand their experience as an individual, and bring in those identities so that they can talk about those things too. I hope that answers your question. We can come back to it, but I do see another question regarding the inclusion of interpreters changing the therapeutic relationship with clients in the Asian diaspora. I guess the question there would be, what is the change? Because usually when we have interpreters, it is out of a necessity. So whether or not it changes that particular relationships out there. Now, we did not see any, and Chi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we saw any studies that looked at comparative studies between the use of interpreters and non-use of interpreters. And those would, again, probably been very different kinds of populations. Chi, am I right on that?
Yeah, no, I don't think we have any literature that's on the interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do anticipate that the clients that would use interpreters would be very different in a acculturative sense than would the population that does not use interpreters, purely because of exposure to English language materials, at least here in the US, and the use of them. So I do think that that would be a fascinating study and understanding. And I wonder if that study would maybe have to be done with linguistically competent counselors working with the client versus somebody that does not know the language and using an interpreter. Kanika, I think you should go for that and study that.
Yeah.
That's great. Yes, I think that's sometimes we feel like we get into that as counselors. I think if we look at, Counseling the Culturally Diverse by Sue and Sue, there's kind of this, let me break everything into chapters and get an idea of every culture. Whereas that's not necessarily the case in practice, because first of all, there's no way you're going to memorize a textbook. And second of all, not all things apply to everybody in every individual experience. And sometimes that can itself be marginalizing in some ways. I guess I can consider an example of somebody, maybe if I go into somebody and saying, hey, so you're Indian. So what's it like to be now I can't even think of an example, but what's it like to be experiencing colorism in your society or something? And that may or may not be relevant to my experience. So.
So I guess the key point is still like staying with that client particularly and like focused on him or her and learning from him or her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As a completely separate note, I'll add, if we're doing recommendations for literature, expanding our knowledge, there are, as somebody that has taught multicultural counseling in the past, one of the things I like to do is bring in narrative points. And there's a lot of comedians from the Asian diaspora that speak about their experience. There's other podcasts also that speak about the Asian experience, and just listening to those and getting an idea of what people have experienced, it's something that can be useful for counselors, period. I think we're reaching our 5 We have 5 more minutes. I know that they told us that we have to be very strict with timelines with Zoom. So if there's any additional questions, I think we can probably take 1 or 2 more.
Also, Dr. Des, do you want to zoom in for the contact information?
Oh yes, I can do that.
So that everybody. Thank you.
We appreciate that, Cecilia.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
If I may, with just a couple minutes left in here, I would love to use this platform to remind everybody that during this time, self-care is very important, obviously, but also a lot of the fear-mongering that's been going on with COVID-19 has led to a lot of our Asian American businesses to lose a lot of income and be affected. Appreciate that, please say. So if you can find ways to support your local Asian-run businesses, all of the businesses obviously too, but the Asian-run businesses have been particularly impacted by many of the representations of fear during this COVID-19 epidemic. So just using my time to support them.
Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you, Dr.
Oh, thank you. All right, I guess we could probably log off then.
Yeah. Yeah, if you guys have questions, and welcome to email Dr. Des or me, and we'll be happy to answer. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Bye.